Hi, I'm Andrea, and I am a graduate student in a higher education program, and this is Latina in HESA. So, Latina in HESA is my way of kind of documenting and debriefing and processing this experience as a graduate student in a higher ed program. It's also a way for me to talk about the things that I haven't been able to talk about in class because classes are only 2 hours long. If you're not aware, HESA stands for Higher Education and Student Affairs. I'm not sure if it's like commonly used anymore. It used to be, I feel like, when I was in college. Now I'm not sure if it's that acronym is as popular, but I use it, and that's where my title comes from, Latina in HESA, as a Latina in higher education and student affairs. So a little bit about me before I dive in. I am a grad student now, after having worked professionally for about 10-ish years now. I worked about 5 years post undergrad in student affairs, and then I worked another 5-ish years in other industries. The reason that this is kind of like a big deal for me is because after a lot of after my Saturn return and just like a lot of realignment, if you will, I decided that, or not so much decided, but more so kept thinking about higher ed, kept thinking about student affairs, and I was like, I need to give this another shot. And if I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna go back to school for it and make sure that I have my master's in this field, and that I am an expert really. And so that's why I wanted to do this, because I am excited about being a higher education and student affairs professional. I like my classes. I which I liked my classes in undergrad, but now my classes make a lot more sense. The readings, I enjoy the readings now. They don't feel as daunting. They make a lot more sense. And I think for me, being a Latina in HESA is about not just being a Latina, but being me. And part of being me is being Latina, but I feel like myself in this field. I feel like myself. I feel authentic, if you will, as a student affairs professional. And so I am finally taking I'm gonna say coveted. I don't know if it's as coveted anymore. Something that I noticed coming back into student affairs is that a lot of, or at least it seems to me, that a lot of student affairs grad programs have shifted to higher ed programs, which I think is very interesting. And I guess I'll learn more about that, or I want to learn more about that. But what, so I lost my train of thought. Anyways, I think, yeah, coming back into the field, what was I saying? I forgot. Well, anyways, I'm taking student development. I'm taking student development, which again, I was like, oh, it's a coveted class. For me, it is. I feel like I've been waiting a decade to take this class, and I'm finally taking it. So this is really my own personal debrief of that class. And don't get me wrong, like, the class is very interactive. The professor gives us a lot of time to like discuss and engage in conversation. I just have a lot more to say. I think part of that, another like observation of coming back and being a grad student now, rather than having been a grad student in over 10 years ago, something that I noticed is that, like, at least in my grad program and like at my institution, grad students, yes, they're a lot younger, but they're also not as experienced. Like, a lot of them, it seems like, are going straight from undergrad to grad, which I think says something. But case in point, I am really excited about this class because I, again, have been waiting to take it for a really long time. This is like the one class that like I feel like since undergrad has been like on my mind. And then two, to think about this class and think about the theories that all these practitioners are allegedly or hopefully are supposed to be using to practice, or using these theories for best practices. For me, I'm in a space where I'm like, I I think it's a combination of like coming back into the field, having professional experience from outside of the field, and also just like being older, a little bit older. I'm interested in how like my practice is influenced by these theories and not necessarily having known what these theories were. So I will get into a little bit of that. But something that I want to acknowledge is that my institution was one of the institutions that received a threat this morning. So I was very abruptly woken up to 22 notifications from my supervisor and the director of my department. I'm a GA, so the director of my department that I am a GA for, letting us know about these alerts that went out this morning about campus being closed, that the institution was working with federal agencies and state agencies and local agencies to get a grasp of what was going on. The threat was to an academic building, and it turns out that my institution was just one of a few. It wasn't, I mean, it was targeted, but it wasn't like the only target. It seems like there were institutions at like kind of random places that were also received these threats. And the reason I want to point this out is one, I think that this is something that again, I'm not sure how practitioners had, or what am I trying to say? I think what I'm trying to say is that like, I think this is an issue that is, I'm going to call it a modern issue. Like, I don't know if we were necessarily dealing with these things 10 years ago, or at least I didn't feel it as a student 15 years ago that I never received an alert. And I went to like a large state school. And during my time at my large state school, there was a huge scandal that broke while I was like in the beginning of my student leadership phase. And even then, like, I never got like these like, or let me not say never, but this idea of like threats to campuses. I did not grow up with like when Columbine first happened, like that was like a rarity. And then Virginia Tech happened, and that I was in high school when that happened, and that was like, whoa, what's going on? Like, this is weird. And now it's like every day we're tracking, and like there's a new news story about there was an active shooter or some type of threat to like a high school or college campus. So that's what I mean by it's a quote unquote modern issue that like as higher ed and student affairs professionals, I definitely think we are like going to be navigating more often. And I think it's just like it brings us outside of our HESA bubble. Like I took history of higher ed last semester, and I really liked that class. I like history, period. I would love to like write a thesis, if you will, on like how the social studies to pop culture like pipeline, like social studies nerd or social studies like enthusiast in school to like the pop culture girly as an adult, because I like both. I was like, social studies was always my best class. I am I wouldn't say I'm like super on top of pop culture, but it's definitely like something that I follow. And I think having had this experience this morning, and experiences is not the first time that my institution in this academic year has had a threat like this. That it situates us in the broader context of society, and that like being on college or on a college campus, being a college student, being a working professional at a college campus doesn't disconnect us from the rest of society. And so I just kind of wanted to put that out there, because that's kind of like what's been on my mind today. It's not lost on me that my institution was also going to have like this big MLK event today. And there was also supposed to be like a president's lunch with the grad students. So it's a lot. It's a lot, but it's also like, I think, things that we need to discuss. So case in point. So like I said, I am taking student development theory finally. And this week we started talking about, we really started talking about like, what is theory? And I think that was really interesting because like, I feel like, and it says it in the book as well, we're using the text from Patton. I don't have it with me because I'm printing it because it's available online via my professor. And so there was this one piece that I thought was really interesting about theory. Is like, theorizing is a form of meaning making born of a desire to create explanations that impose conceptual order on reality. What in the world? Some social scientists see theory as a guide for ways to make decisions and think about how to interpret individuals, environments, and organizations. That comes from Jones and Abe's 2011. And I think that's kind of how I think of theory as well. It's like a way, it's a concept that helps guide your practice. And I think that for me, having had experience, having had, again, both experience within higher ed and outside of higher ed, I'm the thing that I'm most excited about in this class is, yes, the application of theory to practice, but for me, and this may be me being kind of cocky about it, but like really thinking about like, I'm already practicing, but practice to theory of like, okay, these practices that I have inherited from my supervisors and from the teams that I've worked with and from just like the places that I've worked at, how have those practices been influenced by theory without me necessarily knowing about them? Like at my former institution, my supervisor, he had introduced the team to like the Chickering theory, or Chickering overall, of the 7 vectors of development from Chickering. And I had no clue what that meant. Like, that was the first time I had ever heard that. But when we started talking about it in class last night, I was like, yeah, these are things that we are talking about at our staff meetings. These are things that we are talking about like at our town halls. Like, these are things that we are talking about like at our all hands and things like that. So I don't think I would have been able to really grasp the idea of what a theory is had I not been already thinking about like, how do I practice and what guides my practices as a student affairs professional. So there's that. That was the one part. Something that I think I also this wasn't my first introduction in student development theory. I was first introduced to the student personnel point of view in my history of higher ed class, and that document blew my mind. Maybe I should make a video just on that document alone, because I was like, if we were thinking about these things in 1937, like, this is not as new as we think it is. It's not as like novel to think of student development or just like the idea of the student as a whole. In that this is not something that is just of now, or just because of the students that we're working with now, or just because of the way that higher education has been democratized. Like, we have been thinking about these things. I think also learning in that student development theory, I didn't learn this in the class, or rather, this wasn't the first time I was introduced to this in this class. I did the NACUR Art Basics program over the summer, and there was a module on student development theory. And in that module, they kind of introduced this where student development theory comes from. And they don't have any readings or anything like that, but I thought it was fascinating and, like, again, made a lot of sense to think about how student development theory is born out of human development, and it's born out of, counseling and psychology and like other areas of humanities and social sciences, and we're really just applying it to a specific demographic. Not my student texting me while I'm doing this. That's so funny. Anyways, yeah, so we started off talking about theory and like, what is theory? What do we think about theory? And the other part of that, the other reading that we had to do was like using student development theory. We didn't read the whole chapter, but there were notes that I wrote, and that like the role, well, that wasn't as interesting to me, I'm not gonna lie. I think the part that was really interesting to me was the challenges in using student development theory. And this is where I'm a little like, I'm a little nervous about this part, because essentially the challenges that I took away from the reading or from the chapter was, the challenge of time. And don't we feel it? And it's not just the student affairs or even higher ed thing. We're all strapped for time. And with our work, with our lives, work-life balance, if you have figured that out, I love that for you. For me, I think that part of me coming back into student affairs is kind of like the acceptance of like, if I'm gonna be at work for 60 hours a week plus, if I'm gonna be on call, if I'm gonna be available, if I'm gonna be woken up at 7:30 in the morning because somebody decided to send a threat to not even just the institution of higher ed, any institution that I'm working at, and disrupt my entire day, I am going to be giving my time to something that I'm passionate about, something that to me is purposeful. And so to think about that, that's not just a me thing, or that's not just a like societal observation, but that's something that even in theory we are thinking about, the challenge of time. And specifically, I think with this theory is like thinking about like, how are we using our time to either apply or to not, or deciding when to apply said theories. The other part of these challenges were like the resources, and I think this really, for me, what I took away from it was like the professional development of it all. That I think that part of my graduate experience so far has been understanding that theories and theses and hypotheses and all these other things, like, they're not absolute. And theory, the definition of theory talks about that, like, this is a theory, it has to be tested. But I think for me, being a Latina and being an eldest daughter and being a lot of these things and experiences and whatnot, like, to think that I never thought of theory as being flexible, or as I never thought of theory as being able to be questioned. And so to the reason that I bring that up, again, going back to this like professional development piece and resources, is that I think one of the challenges that comes with using student development theories in particular is that we are we don't have time we don't have time to, or the resources, aka the money or the budget, to continue testing these theories, to continuously observe how these theories are being practiced, for us to evolve our own understanding of these theories, and to evolve the data that is out there about these theories. And that I think another something else that I've taken away from my time as a graduate student is that it's part of my due diligence, not just as an academic or as a scholar, as a student, but like as a professional, as a practitioner. It is also my due diligence to not just question, but to also give back to the field by testing these theories, and questioning, and also thinking about like, okay, like this theory works here, but it doesn't work here, and I'm going to use these parts of certain theories to maybe create not necessarily a new theory, but a new space, a new question to think about these theories. I think that professional development is thrown around and thought about as like oh, I'm just gonna go to a conference, I'm gonna go kiki with my former coworkers, and like see all these people. But like professional development is yes, it's going to conferences, but it's also like, what are we doing to evolve ourselves and also our field? And last but not least, and I think I'll close it out with this, the challenge of applying theory to practice. Again, I think that I think this is what I'm most like cautious about, because again, I've been practicing for, I'm not an expert. I have about, this is my 6th year now in a HESA role post undergrad. Again, I have about an additional 5 years of experience, of professional experience outside of the role or outside of HESA roles, and I've learned a lot on the job. And maybe this is not the thing I'll end on, but I think what this space is for me, and what part of these debriefs are for me, is that again, HESA is not just in its own bubble anymore. As a matter of fact, I've been seeing, and part of where I got the idea of doing this was that I've been seeing a lot more articles and discussions, and like just like think pieces, if you will, both on social media or in real life, about like the purpose of higher education, or rather what people are talking about is the purpose of higher education without necessarily naming it that. Asking about, is college necessary? Is it worth it? Is it worth it to attend college? Will college get you a job? Will going to college get you a job? And so that's really what I want to talk about as in this space as a Latina in HESA, especially because again, I am a full-time graduate student, and I think now is the time to talk about these things because I have the time to do it, and to express kind of where I'm coming from, but also like my point of view, and also what I'm looking at in terms of how society is viewing higher ed and how higher ed is interacting with society. So I am looking forward to like taking on this challenge of, yes, applying or taking on the challenge of, okay, I have practice, but how am I going to take these new theories and apply them to the practices that I already have? Because I think part of my, and maybe this is my next video, part of my my own or want in coming back full-time as a grad student rather than like part-time and a full-time employee is that I wanted to dive in fully into the academics of it all. And I thought that that would mean that that meant that my practices weren't, you know, the best practices. But I think in my year as a grad student so far, something else that I've learned is that I may not be the best, but I'm pretty good at this. And it's part of the reason why I needed to be here again, because this is part of my purpose and part of what I'm passionate about. But more than passionate about, I'm also, again, really good at this. And you can take it as you would like. But I'm gonna end it there because, yeah. My goal is to be consistent with this, like uploading like once a week, to talk more about like student development, but just like HESA overall and how it connects to the world in which we live in. So like, comment, subscribe. Again, my name is Andrea. I'm a full-time graduate student and I am a Latina in HESA. Thanks for watching. Bye.